Princeton University's Keller Center, educating leaders for a technology-driven society.
My first question to all of you is, how many of you have seen Al Gore's movie? Okay, so that's a pretty good thing. I have not seen the movie. I just want to tell people that I haven't. And when I came up with that title, I actually was planning on pivoting myself off the Al Gore movie based on my 14-year-old son's representations of what were in the movie. And I just found out yesterday he hasn't seen the movie either. So I'm a little bit worried about that. But okay, what I'd like to do is I want to get some people to stand up in the room. So if you're under the age of 30, so if you were born in the bicentennial year or after, and you've lived at least one winter in Princeton, I'd like you to stand up. Okay, so now I'm going to ask you guys, how many of you have gone ice skating on Lake Carnegie? If you have not gone ice skating on Lake Carnegie, sit down. Okay, so one person. Well, okay. Well, there's a brave soul. I was in school here from 1977 to 1981, and ice skating on Lake Carnegie was a common occurrence at the time. I hated ice skating, but that's what the girls wanted to do, so I tried to do that as well when I was here. But my only point about this ice skating on Lake Carnegie is not to trivialize the consequences of global warming. But the point that I'd like to make about global warming is that I think that the point where we can debate about the consequences, we can go and scare people about what's happening. We can talk about the very real impact, the amazing impact, negative impact that global warming will have in sub-Saharan Africa. I think the time is past for to do that. We can keep talking about that if we want to, but what we really need to talk about is what we're going to do about it. And that's mainly what I want to talk about today, and my perspectives of what we're going to do about it. And by the way, before I actually get into it, I also want to mention, because I am not in engineering, I'm not an engineer, I was not an engineering student, and I'm intimidated as possible to be in the presence of such engineering talent. So as moral comfort, I've brought Bill Fox, who's the chief engineer of NRG, with me. So when we get into the technical portion of this, if you have a question, you'll see this gentleman rise up and come throw his body in front of the question so that I don't embarrass myself. So the question is, why are you listening to me? You're listening to me because I'm Princeton class of '81, and you're not actually listening to me because I'm an expert on global warming. I can tell you honestly, a year and a half ago, I hadn't thought much about the topic. You have at Princeton the leading experts in the world on global warming. And I just saw out of the corner of my eye, one of the leading expert in the world is sitting here in the front row, Professor Robert Sokolow, professor of mechanical engineering at Princeton. So if you actually want to understand global warming, the person that can take Professor Sokolow's course, I don't know, Professor, do you actually teach a course specifically on global warming? Okay. Will you stand up so everyone can see you, Professor? Because but actually the reason you're listening to me because you hope that as a business executive and as an executive in this space, in the energy space, that maybe I would have a different perspective on it. So what I want to do is just, before Vince had actually mentioned that I was CEO of NRG, had anyone in the room actually heard of NRG? Oh, that's a little bit more than we like, because NRG is a company that doesn't want to be heard of. We don't want to see our name in the newspaper. We have no retail face. We don't serve customers. You don't get an electricity bill from us. You get your electricity bill from the Public Service Enterprise Group, which is a traditional utility. Our goal in life until very recently was to go through with no one noticing us. But this is what we are. This is NRG in a nutshell. We're a company which actually today we hit an all-time high. Glad to say our share price at $58.90 today. That means we have a market capitalization of about roughly $7.4 billion. Enterprise value $15 billion. 3,400 employees, and we're located here in Princeton, New Jersey. or as the mayor of West Windsor likes to say, we're actually in West Windsor, but as I say to him, since we're next to the Princeton post office, we're going to still call ourselves Princeton. We are a power generator. We own power plants. That's all we do. We own power plants. Most Americans don't think of where their electricity comes from. They think it's their God-given right that electricity comes in their house reliably and safely and affordably. The actual value chain of electricity starts with the fuel supply. It goes through the transport, then power plants, transmission, distribution. Traditionally, the power system in the United States, like in most countries, was vertically integrated monopoly with generation, transmission, distribution, all bundled into a monopolistic system in this state under the Public Service Enterprise Group. In the late 70s, after the power industry actually screwed up the last energy crisis, the powers that be in Washington decided that actually the only natural monopoly power generation was transmission distribution. So they deregulated the generation sector, and that gave rise to companies like NRG Energy. Fuel supply and transport. Fuel supply, everyone knows about companies, everyone knows about oil and gas companies that drill for oil. Fuel transport, common carriers. We actually own 8,760 coal cars, and that's probably the most relevant thing to this discussion, since much of what we're going to talk about today is coal. The one other thing I want to mention about my own view, when people ask me, what's the most important thing to you as a CEO? How will you define your success at the end of your time as CEO of NRG? I say, to me, even more important than global warming is the safety of NRG's workers. I want to go home. I want every worker at our company to go home at night to their loved ones. And at this time, after 3 years, knock on wood, we have had no fatalities or no life-altering injuries on my watch at NRG, and hopefully that will continue. And we have a record that's far better than the industry average, and we're constantly working to improve that. And the question of safety I'm going to refer to again later in this discussion. But back to power generation. Again, probably the most relevant thing for us is that we are as a power generation company, we're actually in a very unique position in the energy sector. We are both a major provider of electric energy, and we're a major consumer of thermal energy, because what we do is convert BTUs to electricity and then send them into the system. Our portfolio is about 1/3 coal-fired, 1/3 gas-fired, 1/3 oil-fired, but that makes us a very large coal consumer in the United States. This is a map of coal in the United States, and this is a map of the coal-fired power plants that we own. Parish and Limestone in Texas, for you in the back that can't see this. Indian River on the Delmarva Peninsula, Big Cajun 2, just north of Baton Rouge, Huntley and Dunkirk in western New York, Somerset in Massachusetts. The colored areas are the coal supply in the United States. Everyone knows about Appalachian coal, Central App, Northern App. The Illinois Basin currently in disfavor because it's very high sulfur coal. And then this very important thing, which I don't have a pointer, but the little purple in the upper left-hand corner, that's northeastern Wyoming, the Powder River Basin. The reason that the United States is known as the Saudi Arabia of coal, a 300-year supply of coal, low sulfur coal, and we are one of the 5 largest consumers of that coal in this country, and probably the only one that ships Wyoming coal to the far eastern part of the United States. We are burning Wyoming coal in Delaware. We buy 36 million tons of coal a year. So now with that briefing on NRG, it's time for the next question. What do NRG and Norway have in common? And this is not an alliteration quiz. It's not that they both begin with the letter N. Does anyone know? Anyone? Anyone? We both produce about the same amount of carbon. NRG emits over 60 million tons of carbon in the atmosphere a year. That exceeds the total carbon emissions of Norway, a country of 4 million people, from all man-made sources. I don't know, we didn't put the ranking in there, but that would put us somewhere between number 44 and 53 of sovereign nations of the world. And the thing about it is, NRG is not, by any means, by any stretch, the largest power generation company in the United States. We are the 10th largest power generation company. And I tried to portray what I thought was the principal fuel of the ones ahead of us and behind us. This is not scientific. This was me sitting there saying, oh, I think they got more coal plants. But if you think about where we stand as roughly number 50, and we're number 10 in one sector in the United States, Imagine the significance of the top 10 U.S. Worldwide, most of them being very coal-oriented. So why the focus on us? Well, I think you're getting there. So I see for the young people in the crowd, I mean, maybe it's just that I got stuck on a plane the other day and I had to watch this movie, Aquila and the Spelling Bee or whatever it's called. But I want someone to tell me what the word anthropogenic means. Well, there's no guaranteeing that spelling is the correct one, but hopefully someone spell checked it. But anyway, anthropogenic, as far as I know, and it's not a word I've ever heard, means emissions of carbon from man-made sources. Because actually one of the things that opponents of carbon regulation like to tell you is that, sure, mankind might emit a few billion tons of carbon in the atmosphere, but nature itself emits trillions of tons of carbon. I've heard that from very important congressmen, but the fact of the matter is that the world was in balance before we got it. So anyway, why do we, this is the total carbon emissions in the United States, or no, total greenhouse gas emissions from all sources, 7 million metric tons, or 7,000 million metric tons, 7 billion metric tons. And this is the total that come from carbon dioxide. So you can see that the great majority of greenhouse gases is actually 6 billion. And again, I'm getting into Professor Sokolow's area, so I'm getting really nervous here, so I'm going to move a little quicker. Okay, there are three main sectors in terms of carbon. There's the transportation sector, the industry sector, and then our sector. The industry in the United States is under siege from Chinese manufacturers, high raw material costs. Do people want to beat on poor U.S. industry? Not really. Okay, let's look at the transportation sector. Does anyone want to regulate carbon from, how many cars are there in the United States? 100 million cars? With the big four being as struggling as they already are to catch up? I tell you, they don't want to. And the new chairman of the House Energy Committee is John Dingell, 82 years old, from Michigan. John Dingell will do anything to protect the big four. So the transportation sector is not the most likely sector where we're going to see improvement in carbon. So who falls in the middle of the bullseye? The power generation sector. And my point is we should fall in the bullseye because we emit 37% of the total greenhouse gases in the United States. We're the biggest emitter of carbon biggest emitting sector of carbon in our country being the biggest emitting country of carbon in the whole world. So people are focusing on us, and my point is they should. So why don't we just do something about it? One of the reasons is that this new awareness of global warming is coming at an inconvenient time from a pricing perspective. What this graph is showing is that after 20 years of the American consumer's energy costs falling from the early 80s until the early part of this decade, the costs have started to skyrocket. And you can see, and they're trending up. The top line shows total energy expenditures moving up to 6 or 7% of the average American's disposable income. Most of that, you see, the middle line is basically from your car, from gasoline, and then the lower line is electricity bills, which are creeping up. Electricity bills are a very sensitive political issue, as are gasoline, as we've all seen. The American consumer complains when their cost of driving their 10-mile-per-gallon SUV becomes expensive. And so, given that to do something about carbon is going to be expensive, it's not coming at the most convenient time from the cost of energy. Now, if you're sort of a liberal and you say, well, this country's been controlled by Republicans for the last few years, and they don't really care about the common man, and the fact that this cost is going up, this is not hurting the Crane family. It's hurting people who are living closer to the line. Well, the problem with that is it's also impacting American industry. And so no matter how cynical you may be about the conservative agenda, conservatives do care about American industry. And what this graph is showing on the right is that there is a very strong negative correlation, inverse correlation between rising electricity prices and demand. A lot of people say that electricity prices are insensitive, or I guess you would say in economics term, demand or price inelastic. Sorry, it's been a long time since I was in school. I forget my economics 101. But in fact, what this shows is through the 70s, when electricity prices were going up, demand was actually falling in response to that. And when electricity demand falls, since there's a very high correlation between electricity demand and GDP, that actually the economy was hurting and the industrial sector was hurting. So, so essentially, whether you're on the right or on the left, you have to be sensitive about the impact of doing something on global warming has on the American economy. Now, this slide is very important. You know, basically, how did we get ourselves into the situation we're in today as an industry? And basically what this mountain range looks like, this shows the addition of power plants in the United States since 1950. And what you'll see is that for the longest time, and these plants are still here, and this is one of the issues, the blue on the bottom, those are coal plants. You can see essentially around the late 80s, people stopped building coal plants. They also stopped building this maroon, which is nuclear plants. And what happened was that our industry became infatuated with natural gas as a fuel because it was efficient, it was quick to start, and it was far, far cleaner than coal plants. And so you see this monumental build of natural gas-fired generation at the beginning of this decade. This is one of the most stunning civil infrastructure achievements, I think, of recent history in terms of how much our industry added as much capacity in the early part of this decade as Japan has installed right now, and it was virtually all natural gas fired. And so we were all sitting there, you know, fairly happy with the situation. But everyone did their economics for these gas-fired plants on the theory that natural gas, which is this line here, oh, I have to press one more button. Natural gas, which is this line, would stay in this $2 to $3 per million BTU. But a funny thing happened on the way to the forum. When you suddenly overnight create a huge demand for natural gas, and American supply of natural gas is depleting every year, the price skyrockets. So you can see what happened to the price of natural gas in response to building all this power generation. And one of the key things that we have to be worried about, and one of my points here, is that there is no substitute for the fact that 52% of the generation in the United States is coal-fired right now. So people who want to deal with global warming have to come to grips with the fact that we need to deal with coal. And I think that's a key message here. We cannot go back to natural gas. If we substitute natural gas again, the price will skyrocket. And keep in mind, Americans use not only natural gas indirectly through electricity, but a lot of people have natural gas-fired homes, so they're getting a double when natural gas prices skyrocket. Now, you see what I refer to as the gas-coal indifference zone. In rough terms, that's the price at which you would build a coal plant rather than gas plant. If gas is higher than that line, you want to build a coal plant, not a gas plant, which leads to what you really need to be concerned about. This little mountain right here. As I say, you should be worried about this. Very, very worried. Because this is the coal plant. In fact, I think this quite understates. This graph, I don't know where I got it from, but this has to be old. Because right now, in the United States, the power industry of the United States has plans to build 100,000 megawatts of coal plant. And they're building that because of the price signal being sent by natural gas. The United States, if it builds 100,000 megawatts of coal plant, and this is a decision that's going to be made this year being 2007 and 2008. These are the critical years for this 100,000 megawatts of coal plant. If the United States adds this 100,000 megawatts of coal plant, we will be adding an incremental amount of carbon equal to the combined carbon emissions of France and Spain together. Now, one of the reasons, well, I'll get to that later, and then there's the knock-on effect to that. Everyone knows, and the great opponents of doing anything about global warming in this country say, well, you know, the real problem is China. You know, everyone reads the statistics. By 2009, China will be emitting more carbon than the United States. China adds a coal-fired plant every 10 days. All this is true. But the United States has no leg to stand on vis-a-vis China. You know, if we suddenly start building all these traditional coal plants. So this, to me, is the single most important issue in the global warming debate at this time. Now, this type of curve you've probably never seen before. I spent almost my whole life looking at curves like this, my whole professional life. What this shows, this is a supply load curve for Texas. For those of you who don't know how the power system works in the United States, the Texas grid is essentially a sovereign nation for itself. Texas has refused to interconnect itself with the rest of the United States so that it's intrastate commerce, not interstate commerce. It doesn't have to be regulated by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. So Texas is an island when it comes to generation. But this is what we call the merit order stack. Each one of these little dots represents a power plant in Texas. The red ones, in case you're interested, are NRG power plants. And this market works on what's called a single price auction system. Because what makes electricity different? I mean, you know, I used to say to people when I was graduating from law school, if you told me that I was going to spend my career in the electricity industry, just shoot me now. Because it's not really, you know, how I see myself spending my career. But there's one thing that's intellectually extremely fascinating about electricity, because, you know, it's not the product itself. It's the fact that it's a commodity that has to be delivered in real time. You know, you turn on your toaster, some power plant somewhere needs to be producing electricity at that moment. Electricity cannot be stored. So the way that the market's been set up is as a single, to make sure there are always enough power plants to meet the peak demand, that it's a single price auction system where every power plant on the system gets the price on the most expensive marginal cost unit that has to be dispatched at a particular moment in order to meet that demand. So what this graph shows is this is the minimum demand in Texas all the time. There are 21,000 megawatts of electricity being consumed in Texas. In the middle of the summer on a hot day, it's around 60,000 megawatts. And these are the lowest marginal cost units rising up to the highest marginal cost units. Now what you see is the first couple units, I don't know what they are. Maybe they're hydro. But these little ones, those two red diamonds, those are nuclear units at very low marginal cost. And then all those next between 0 and 3, those are all coal units. Then you see the big step up, and that's when the gas units kick in. So anyone who can build coal in Texas right now can get that amount of margin, you know, with average or max load. They can get that huge margin, $30 or $40 per megawatt hour, because power in Texas is being priced off natural gas. And as a result, there are 17 coal-fired power plants on the books in Texas right now. And the governor of Texas has said he will put them on a fast-track permitting process so they all get permitted within 6 months. Most parts of the country, to get a coal plant permit is a 3 or 4 year process. So the new coal plants that this country is trying to build, that's the issue. And the tip of the sword on that issue is Texas. Okay, so now that we know the problem, talking about the solution. I'll go through this fairly quickly. Because I think it's important that we don't underestimate what we're talking about. The most imposing scientific and technical challenge humanity has ever faced. I think that speaks for itself. Because it's global, it's in every country's interest to get every other country to bear the burden of tackling it. Because it's long-term, it's in every generation's interest to shirk the responsibility and shift it onto the next one. And in that way, nothing will get done. And then, in the absence of forceful and charismatic leadership, and I know that this series is about leadership, it's almost impossible to galvanize a populist movement with respect to an issue that is having no immediate negative impact on the populace. So what's happening in terms of Washington in this issue? Well, you know, I used to joke that, you know, the problem with global warming is that there are only two people in the world that don't believe in it. Unfortunately, they're the president and the vice president of the United States. But, you know, that may be unfair. I'm not sure it's unfair. But basically what we have right now is we have confusion. And we have several bills that are pending in Congress, a mandatory carbon regulatory scheme, including one sponsored by the leading Republican candidate for 2008, John McCain. We have a situation where just this last Tuesday, people who engage in wishful thinking are hoping that the case that was argued before the Supreme Court, Massachusetts versus the EPA, that the legislators and the executives would be able to pass the buck to the Supreme Court, and like a bolt of lightning out of 1954 with Brown versus the Topeka Board of Education, the Supreme Court would order the EPA to declare that carbon is a pollutant, and then all would be right with the world and no one would have had to have done anything. Well, I mean, that may happen. I find it very unlikely that this Supreme Court takes that activist decision. But that case and the people who came down on both sides, Massachusetts was the named plaintiff. All the northeastern states supported them. The two states that defended the EPA and their non-regulation of carbon, Texas, of course, the single largest carbon-emitting state in the United States, and Michigan, trying to protect the automotive industry. But again, I don't put much consolation. I don't put much faith in the fact that we can call on the judiciary to bail us out. So, in the absence of anything happening at the federal government, two fairly important and far-seeing governors have stepped up and are trying to do something at the state level. Governor Schwarzenegger just signed into law a carbon regulatory scheme in California this fall, and Governor Pataki has led a northeastern initiative. 12 northeastern states goes by the name RGGI. The thing about this is that it makes no sense whatsoever to regulate carbon at the state level, because the way electricity flows in the United States, if you penalize the plants in your own state, the next state next to you doesn't do it, you'll just be bringing in carbon, emitting power from the next state. So these states are going after this because they're not seeing any action out of the federal government, even though they know that it's not all that sensible. So what I liked, I don't know if you saw Kofi Annan opening the climate change conference in Nairobi, a frightening lack of leadership. I used to have on here, the American delegation's response was, he's not talking about us. But anyway, but in fairness to the Bush administration, they're not doing nothing. They did pass the first Energy Act that's been passed in the U.S. Congress in 13 years last year, the Energy Policy Act. And in that act, they throw a little bit of government money trying to encourage some carbon-friendly technologies. And we're going to talk more about these. Wind, of course, geothermal, nuclear, and integrated gasification combined cycle plants. This graph, I mean, we're trying to conceptualize how all this works out, but basically what we're trying to show here is that this is supposed to be sort of like a three-dimensional chessboard with the various axes: moderate to aggressive, later to now, voluntary to mandatory. And the Bush administration's point of view on global warming or carbon regulation is that it should be voluntary forever, which is not really regulation. So then you've got the Northeast RGGI states, you've got California with their new legislation, and you have the new congressional leadership that's been very assertive. And I don't know what happened to the little booklets that we had, but one of the things okay, well, you can get one of the things I enclosed in there. One of the documents we enclose in there is a copy of a letter that the three key senators on the energy side in the Senate just sent to the president on November 15th. Senators Bingaman, who will take over the Senate Energy Committee, Senator Boxer from California, who I think is in line to be responsible for environmental, and the critical Senator Lieberman, who, given that Senator Lieberman is the Republicans' great hope in the Senate to sort of vote with them to frustrate the Democratic majority, they all called on the president to do something about climate change. And you may have seen there was an article in the New York Times yesterday saying that the Bush administration may think about changing their point of view. But our point of view is that, look, you've got these new forces that are trying to be more aggressive, and that possibly we can get something that starts, sort of moderate in terms of aggressiveness, and then sort of, moves in terms of aggressiveness as the technology develops. This is sort of a middle road. It's not going to satisfy the purists, but it's something that in this current political environment is possible. So then, having sort of put out the political agenda, then you could say, so what are we supposed to, what are we going to do about it? What's NRG, medium-sized power company, going to do in this very uncertain environment with what I really say is the biggest issue, of a generation? And so, from my point of view, the first thing that we would do, and something that I would say to all the students here, something that I think has been pretty important in terms of thinking about my career is the most important thing to me when we really start thinking about the carbon issue, the global warming, is I'd say take a stand. the first and most important thing to us was that we wanted to stand for something as a company. And I don't know how many people in the room have worked for a corporation, but I firmly believe that a corporation is not it's not a human, but it has a soul, it has a heart. And from my perspective, the first thing and the thing that was very important to me in terms of the people at NRG was, I don't think it was part of the economic bargain that the people who came to work for NRG made, that they were going to work for a tobacco company. I think they came to work for an electricity company that was dedicated to providing affordable power to people in a safe and environmentally responsible way. So the first thing to me, and I think a very important point, is whenever we talk about global warming, we start by saying, look, it's a moral issue. It's an issue, and there aren't that many moral issues in the business world, I have to tell you. And this is where the question of safety comes in. Morality changes in the business world. In the late 1800s, I don't think any of the great industrial leaders of that time cared that much about workplace safety. I don't think they would have sacrificed bottom line profit to keep their people safe. But after there was an increase in awareness in the early 1900s, people getting killed, people getting, the muckraker period, there became a point where people recognized that safety is more important than profit. And I haven't been able to think of any other thing. And today, when you talk to Wall Street, when you talk to the people, the institutional investors who are invested in NRG, there's no debate about safety. That everyone recognizes that a corporation's role starts with keeping its people safe. My point is that I think global warming at this point rises to a level where it's something that transcends even the bottom line profit. And I think one of the big areas that we're going to get into is, what does Wall Street think about carbon? What is Wall Street doing? Because our industry is very capital intensive, very, very subject to the influence of Wall Street. And what position are the big commercial banks and investment banks taking on? What role they'll play in global warming? Will they keep funding projects that are bad for the environment? Now, our carbon blueprint, which has 8 points in it, again, it's in the same booklet with a little bit more explanation. And I actually have no idea how much time I have or I've used, but I'm not going to go through all 8, but there are just a couple, because some of them we've already talked about, and some of them are not that unusual. They're similar to what other people have said. There are only 2 points that I want to mention. The first is I want to reemphasize point 4, which is that the battle this year on global warming should be about the new power plants that are being built in the United States or being proposed to be built, because once they get started, they're not stopping. The second point I want to make, and I'm going to profess at this point, I consider myself to be a very open-minded person. But when it comes to global warming, there's one thing that I'm extremely closed-minded on, and I know there are going to be people in this room that completely disagree with this. But at this point, my perspective is that if you really want to do something about global warming, you can't be anti-nuclear. If you're anti-nuclear, I've got no time for you. Because, look, dealing with nuclear waste, it's an issue, but it's a far more manageable issue than dealing with global warming. And, people who say, and I just read a letter to the editor, we're dealing with a plant we're proposing in Delaware where this couple complained about, the fact that we're trying to build a clean coal plant in Delaware because it was coal of any kind, and said, let's just put wind farms offshore. Wind has its role. Wind is not an alternative for baseload. Most electricity demand in the United States is driven by air conditioning, and there are an increasing number of studies. And Texas is one of the windiest places in the United States. The wind does not blow when it's 110 degrees in Texas. The wind does not blow when you're turning your air conditioner on. It blows in the middle of the night when you're asleep. Okay, there are 2 baseload options in the United States. They're coal and the nuclear. And so, from my perspective, one of the things that we need in this country is a renaissance of nuclear power. So this is what we believe in. Now we talk about what we actually do. Our basic carbon strategy as a company has 5-pointed pentagon. 4 things that we're trying to do: wind power, act as a test bed for carbon research and development. We're going to go through each of these: nuclear expansion, IGCC, and what this all leads to is policy. And I think one of the things that is often missing from the carbon debate by people who just touch on the surface, and this is something that Professor Sokolow is particularly good at, is that we always have to keep into account the time dimension. Not all of these alternatives are available within the same period of time. So you see what I've got here now is we can add wind, in 1 to 3 years, but it's not a baseload option. Clean coal, 5 to 7 years, nuclear, 8 to 10, and some of these new technologies that we're talking about, 10 to 20 years. So now we're getting to the point where we're going to have about maybe 5 or 10 minutes about technology, and I know I've been talking a lot, and you're probably pretty bored. So I want to actually ask all the students in the room to stand up one more time, because I want to ask you guys a question. Now it's going to be very complicated. I know all you guys in the back. You stood up before when I was under. Okay, so I'm going to ask you guys a question. I want you to think about your career. Okay, and this is going to be pretty difficult. I'm going to ask you this question. And if you don't agree with what's on the slide, I want you to sit back down, okay? So the question is this: how would you like to get rich while practicing your chosen profession and saving humanity? Okay. So who has a problem with that? No one. No one sat down. Vince, you've done a great job. These are very practical people you've recruited to the school. Okay, good. Well, I'm going to try and make you interested in this technology section by explaining how. Okay, now you can sit down. Okay. There are basically 3 things that we need to accomplish, and this is a very engineering-intensive thing. We need to sequester carbon, which has been separated pre-combustion. And again, Professor Sokolow, Professor of Mechanical Engineering, understands this better than I do, but there are basically 2 ways of taking carbon out of the process of making electricity. You can take it out before you combust your fuel, or you can take it out after. And for reasons that engineers understand, it's easier to do beforehand. And so the problem is, once you take it out, what do you do with it? That's the issue that we're struggling with now. And most things, most of the proposal as to what you do with it have to do with sequestering it underground, using it for enhanced oil recovery where there are oil fields, otherwise putting it into saline formations. This is a huge area and a very important area that needs to be solved in the near future. We'll talk a little bit more about that. The second, and this is the one that's least advanced, and if I were you, if I was talented like you all are as engineers, this is where I'd be getting myself rich, as a 22-year-old, is that one way or another, we have to deal with the fact that 52% of the plants in the United States are traditional coal plants. Sooner or later, we need to solve. We are not getting rid of those plants. I'm sorry. They are going to be there, emitting carbon in the atmosphere. We need to figure out a way over some period of time to get the carbon out of their flue gas, out of their exhaust gas. And that is an area where it's unlike the first area, which is already sort of beginning the control of the big companies. This is an area where entrepreneurs, people with an idea, can actually, this is still in the hands of very small entrepreneurial venture capital companies. And if you're talented in this area, this is an area where you can get rich while practicing your profession and saving humanity. So that's what I would focus on. And then for those of you who are interested in nuclear, the country has a crying need for more nuclear engineers at this period of time. So what do we do as a company? And I'm going to tie into this technology. Last June 22nd, we announced that we were going to build 10,500 megawatts of new generation in the United States. $16 billion total investment. Now that's for a company with a market cap of $8 billion, so that's pretty big. A lot of new jobs, a lot of cost savings, and carbon emissions displaced, because it's quite a carbon-friendly program. And let me go through it. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do, we own one nuclear power plant in South Texas. This plant in Matagorda County, 15,000 acres. I mean, you can't appreciate the magnitude of that site that you're looking at. That site itself, I mean, I'm exaggerating, it's about the size of Rhode Island. You know how nuclear power plants look with the big dome? That's like one tiny little thing in that corner. So, huge site. We've proposed to build 2 units there. The site was originally designed for 4 units. This power plant alone in little Matagorda County, 39,000 people, will, if you assume that this plant displaces alternative, which would be coal-fired generation, will itself displace a Bulgaria of coal. That's what makes nuclear so important. Nuclear moves the needle in a way that wind does not. This would be 2,600 megawatts. That's enough power to provide the electricity for probably 2 million homes. So this slide is up here as a sort of a warning to you engineers out there. There's one thing about this plant that makes us different from the other 20 people in the country that are proposing new nuclear plants right now. We don't want any first of a kind engineering. That's what killed the nuclear industry in the 70s. They redesigned everything all the time. You know, for us, time is money, certainty is money. We have to raise $5 billion to build this plant. So our approach is, look, we know there are more advanced nuclear plants than this one on the drawing board, but we want to build something that's been built before. There are 4 of these plants that have been built before. They're all in Japan. Our whole thing, you see one of them, Shika 2, owned by Hokuriku Electric. I was there a few months ago. This is what we want to do, is do something that's been done before, that's proven. And to us, that's the key to get the nuclear business started in the United States. Again, this plant will still be 20 years more advanced than any nuclear plant in the United States today. Are there any college freshmen here in this room? Do you remember how much it cost you to apply to Princeton?
To apply?
Yeah. What was the application fee? $50. $50? Yeah, $50. Well, if you want to apply for a nuclear license from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, it's going to take us 2 years to write the application. We budgeted $50 million to write the application. And the Nuclear Regulatory Commission has told us it's going to take them 3 years to consider it. So consider the admissions of Princeton. That's right. So the thing about nuclear is the nuclear industry in the United States, which has created an extremely enviable record of safety over the last 20 years, is very, very safety conscious. Like I said, 4 or 5 years to get this thing applied for, permitted, 4 years to get it built. So nuclear, in the best case scenario, and if you're anti-nuclear, consider yourself lucky that there will not be a nuclear plant in this country before 2014 at the earliest. And hopefully when there is one, it'll be ours. Second thing, wind. Europe way ahead of the United States in this area, but these things are so large now. They're now getting to the size of 3 or 4 megawatts, and they're as tall as the Washington Monument. These blades are as big as 747 blades. This little thing on the top is far bigger than a Winnebago, the biggest Winnebago you've ever seen. That's the scale of these things. How much more can you scale these things up? Yet the biggest one on the drawing board is 4 megawatts. The nuclear plant I just mentioned was 2,600 megawatts. Wind just isn't the solution to baseload power in the United States. And then the last one, and this is the most important, is that, again, addressing directly the question of clean coal, there is a technology out there called integrated gasification, combined cycle plants, where you basically take the coal, you synthesize it. This is easy for me to say, and I can barely understand what I'm saying. You oxidize it, you remove the carbon before the combustion, and then you put it into a quote-unquote traditional combined cycle plant. And then there are questions, and there are all sorts of intermediate phases about how much of the carbon you can get out, but this is the most promising approach to taking coal and turning it into a carbon-friendly technology. And this administration actually is sponsoring a test project which will be built either in Illinois or Texas called FutureGen. And this is the basic technology that the administration is sponsoring as being the future of clean coal in this country. Again, taking the carbon out on the front end. Now, as I said, that's stuff that's basically commercial now, near commercial now. Did I drop something? The other thing is that we still have to work on getting the carbon out of flue gas. We've teamed with a company in Cambridge, Mass. Called Green Fuels Technology. They actually have a process, just to show you the creativity that's being applied in this field, where algae, You take the flue gas and you pump it over a field of algae. The algae eats the carbon. You grow the algae, and then you can recombust the algae, and you can create sort of a cycle of constantly capturing the carbon and recombusting. I was just at an award ceremony this last week. They won this award, unfortunately, for a test project they did with the Arizona Public Service Commission out in Arizona, the one pictured in the bottom. But I don't know what career aspirations all of you engineers have in the room, but when I met the CEO of this Greenfields Technology, I said, you know, what keeps you up at night? What's the biggest challenge in business? He said, finding algae experts. He said there are only about 4 algae specialists in the whole world. And so if you want a career in algae, you know, this is an area where you can turn it into a very profitable business. So essentially, if we get this entire program built, we will reduce our own carbon footprint as a company, or carbon intensity, as we like to say, from 0.9 tons of CO2 per every megawatt hour we produce down to 0.7. And then if we find a way of sequestering the carbon associated with the IGCC plants we want to build, we'll take it to 0.6. I mean, in a world where there's a price on carbon, this would be a very meaningful improvement of the carbon position for our company. Okay, so I know I've been talking for a long time, and I hope that we can have a spirited discussion. I should have said earlier that if you have questions or if you want to disagree and shout out things that I'm saying that are just absolutely make no sense, that you should do it as I'm going along, but maybe you can come back at the end. I really want to end just with a couple thoughts, given the nature of this series that I've been invited to speak in on leadership in this area of carbon. And so the first I want to talk about what I've tried to do. And what this shows is a slide that I presented at a fairly important conference for our industry this last month, or a couple months ago. And what I really want to see is ask your opinion, particularly to the students in the room, you know, whether you think that this is a successful way of trying to influence the debate. Because essentially what I did, again, in front of a bunch of people from the power industry, and I have to tell you, for those of you who don't know many utility executives tend to be extremely conservative. They tend to be reactive more than proactive. They're not known for their sense of humor. And they definitely don't like being compared to monkeys. You know, and when I put this slide up, and particularly with the you know, the industry view of you know, see no carbon, speak no carbon, hear no carbon, there were some seriously angry people around the industry, and I have to question myself. You know, was this just being provocative, or was I actually accomplishing something? I do know that the 3 industry executives that I exempted on the left, I really made friends of them, because the first guy, Peter Darby, who runs Pacific Gas and Electric out of San Francisco, I'd never met him before, and he called me like the next day. I said, hey, I hear I got exempted. And the guy on the right, who's a very important guy, Jim Rogers, who runs Duke, you know, he came up to me about a week ago at another conference, put his arm around me. He goes, I appreciate anyone that makes me look moderate. And then Jeff Sturba from the Public Service of New Mexico, who's a very enlightened guy. But I'm still questioning, you know, whether this, you know, whether this was the approach to take. I would say that some of the consequences of it, apart from making people angry, is that it did allow me to get our company in the spotlight on this issue. Because if you think about it, we're the 10th largest power generation company in the sector. You know, when an issue comes up with the automotive, think of which company is the 10th largest automotive company? What, Isuzu or something? Does anyone care what the CEO of Isuzu thinks about anything? I don't think they do. You know, if there's any issue on the automotive front, they're going to go to one of the big 3. Well, it's not that different from the power generation sector. And since I thought that the power industry's official position was so unwise, it was important for me to get noticed so that you know, we could position ourselves as a company that doesn't actually agree. So in terms of the type of headlines that it had, and I have another life lessons for the students in the room, because On this issue and on another issue that our company had around a hostile takeover earlier in the year, one of the things I found is that when you get into the corporate world, a lot of things are done by committee. You know, okay, we got to write a letter to the editor. Let's have 6 people look at it. And whenever you write something by committee, all the colorful stuff gets taken out. You know, it goes down to the lowest common denominator. And what I'm saying to you as you go in your career, don't let that happen. Because, you know, the print media is no different from TV or anything like that. In this environment that we live in the world, it's 15 seconds. It's just a headline, right? And so you really have to capture your point you know, with just one phrase or something. So what I asked our head of communications to do is say, look at the press response to this and what did they actually quote. And so, you know, the exact things they quote are the things that several people in the company told me, please don't say that. Yeah. So I'd say, you know, if you have something to say it. You know, don't condition it to the point. The other thing that happened as a result of this speech, and again, the packet, you'll see a letter that was written by the Union of Concerned Scientists to another CEO of a power company that's proposing a lot of traditional coal plants. And basically this Union of Concerned Scientists juxtapositions what they consider to be more in line position on carbon to this company's position. Again, made me no friends, you know, I'm not getting invited to cocktail parties from that power company, but to the extent that they are under pressure to not do the wrong thing, you know, hopefully there'll be some positive impact from being such a loudmouth on this issue. So beyond what we're trying to do, and again trying to appeal to you, as I think about the magnitude of this issue, you know, I think back of, you know, what have been the successes over the last, in my lifetime, or even in some of these cases a little bit before my lifetime, of, you know, what can we draw from the things that have been done right in the past. And so I thought about the Manhattan Project and the sense of national urgency, the scientific community coming together to support the government to achieve a goal. I thought about the Marshall Plan, and this is something that I think is very important to the global warming debate because the Marshall Plan was intensely multilateral, obviously the U.S. trying to help Europe. If we're going to do anything about carbon long term, we need to make this a multilateral effort. We need to draw China in. We also need to involve the private sector because global warming is not going to be solved by the government just throwing a massive amount of money at the problem. And then I thought about the one that really, again, was most apropos to this lecture series, which was the visionary leadership that was started with the Project Apollo. And you know, I don't know, Meredith, can we play this clip?
I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal before this decade is out of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the earth. No single space project in this period will be more impressive to mankind or more important for the long-range exploration of space, and none will be so difficult or expensive to accomplish.
So, think about John Kennedy there. I mean, May 25th, 1961. The first, Alan Shepard had, I mean, for people who weren't around in 1961, I was 2 years old, you know, to think that Alan Shepard, that the U.S. had just lobbed Alan Shepard, you know, to Bermuda, you know, 20 days before. So, and 20 days later, he goes from just barely getting a man into space to saying, before the decade's out, we'll put a man on the moon. I mean, think of the audacity of that. And the other thing I like about it, two other things I like about John Kennedy, and to me, those first 30 words, as you can see, his speaking style, he's no Martin Luther King, you know, when it comes to speaking, but the power of the idea, he knew when he gave that speech, when he, you know, that even if he had served 2 terms, he would be out of office, you know, by the time that goal was achieved. And when you think of politics today and how close politics is tied to the election cycle, could you imagine anyone sort of saying, I will make the sacrifice? And then my third point is, he actually says, look, this can be expensive and it's going to be incredibly difficult. You know, can you imagine in our current age of politics where it's all about immediate gratification, any leading American politician saying, It's going to cost a lot of money. It's going to be very difficult, and it's going to happen after I'm off in retirement. It just doesn't happen today. But I mean, that's the sort of visionary leadership that that I think we need in terms of this industry. So I know I'm just about to conclude, I promise. So the last thing I want to say, I was thinking that I was talking to someone a while back. I actually can't even remember who, but we got talking about what has made America great. And what this person said to me is, what's made this country great is that every generation of Americans has risen to the principal challenge that confronted it. And in the course of rising to that challenge, leaders had emerged to lead the way. And when I think about this, so I actually sort of went back and sort of thought about the different generations and what were their great challenges. And when I think about my generation, by my generation, I'm thinking about people in their 40s and 50s. I'm 47 years old. And I think about what will define my generation of political, civic, business, military, scientific, religious leaders. What will define us? And my last question to you for the day is, I was thinking about it, is that if you think about the history textbook that's written in the year 2050, anyone in the room, shout out the answer. Name to me one American between the age of 40 and 60 who will be featured in that history book.
Bill Gates.
Exactly. That's the only one I came up with two. The other one was a Princetonian, class of '86, Jeff Bezos. But starting internet shopping, I'm not sure it's the same as George Washington. But you're right. Apart from Bill Gates, I couldn't think of anyone in my generation that's going to make it into the history books. And part of that we should be thankful for. We didn't have to win World War II. So we weren't faced with that necessity. But when I think about the legacy that we're passing on to the next generations, the students here, and I think that in a lot of ways, I sort of decry politics from both ends. Is that I think that our current generation of leaders are, we're hooked on immediate gratification like it's crack cocaine. I mean, okay, we're running the biggest deficits in the history of humanity. Let's cut our taxes some more. Let's bequeath to our children, the largest trade deficits that have ever been seen, the largest financial deficits that have ever been seen. But this issue, global warming, this is an issue where I like to think that our generation can actually sort of get the ball rolling. I know that we won't be around to see it finish. I'm 47 years old. I'm much closer to the end of my business career than I am to the beginning, and I know that I won't be here when people declare victory over greenhouse gas emissions and global warming. But I think that we can get a start, and then we can hopefully pass it on to your generation with some momentum. And from my perspective, without being too critical, I don't want to end on saying something critical about my own generation. So I'm going to say there is one redeeming quality to our generation, which when I think about what have we done well and what have we done wrong, there's one thing that I think that we've done extremely well, and that is that our generation has spared no expense to educate your generation. It's when I think of the American education system, the education you're getting at Princeton, the cost of the education you're getting here at Princeton, and I can say that one thing that never comes up in discussions I have with my wife and I have with our friends is no one ever does a cost-benefit analysis of sending their kids to school. We will send our kids to the best school that will take them, whatever the cost is. And so, so I guess that's the one positive legacy that I hope that we're bequeathing you. And hopefully we'll get some momentum going on dealing with this global warming issue. But at the end of the day, it's going to be your generation's role to actually conquer this. So, ending up, and this is truly my last slide, ending up with a reference back to Al Gore's movie, which again I didn't see it. As I understand it, Al Gore's point was his main thing in terms of, in the movie, of what you do is shrink your own carbon footprint. And last reference to Professor Sokolow, I spent a few hours with him last week, very enjoyable. He taught me an expression which I'd never used before, and he had this great professorial way of doing it. We would talk about some of the things our company was doing or the industry was doing, and he'd get this sort of disappointed little look on his face, and he'd say, too timid, too timid. And that's my point about Al Gore's movie, is that if all you do is shrink your own carbon footprint, it's a very positive thing to do, but it's too timid given your capabilities. The second thing you can do, as we talked about before, is get involved yourself. Use your professional talents. Use it. Try and solve the problem. As engineers, as people who can get things done. But the last point I'd make, and this is the part that's an utter quandary to me, is where's the civil outrage? I did not go to college during the Vietnamese war years, but I certainly was old enough to be cognizant of what's going on. I actually grew up 5 miles from the Kent State campus during the 1970 situation. But I was at school when people were protesting against apartheid. Where's the outrage of what's being done to the environment? So, and again. And this is the part where I got to be very careful about what I say, because I'm not trying to bring the wrath of the population down on my own house. But there are so many people that are sensitive on this issue. Wall Street is acutely sensitive on this issue, but power companies are not insensitive politicians. The time for some of the approaches of the 60s and 70s to what I think is going to be the defining issue of our day is really now. And so I just really wanted to end up just by reading you a very short quote which to me sort of captures the situation we have today with global warming. Again, it was a great leader in a different era referring to a different social issue. But I'm going to read this and then I'll be done. Again, there are in this country millions of people of goodwill whose voices are as yet unheard, whose course is as yet unclear, whose courageous acts are as yet unseen. These millions are called upon to gird their courage to speak out, to offer the leadership that is needed. If they do not, history will record that the greatest tragedy of this period is not the denials and obfuscations of the bad people, but the appalling silence and indifference of the good people. Our generation will have to repent, not only for the words and actions of the children of the darkness, but also for the frightening apathy of the children of light. That's Martin Luther King talking about the obviously the civil rights movement. So with that, thank you very much. I'm sorry I took so much time, but